Chocolate, a simple pleasure that most Americans took for granted, became one of the most powerful weapons in the United States post-war arsenal in 1945. In the devastated streets of German cities, where hollow-eyed children had known nothing but war and deprivation for years, the sight of American GIs casually dispensing Hershey bars created a cultural shockwave that would reshape German perceptions of their conquerors more effectively than any military parade or political decree. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? It's incredible to see our historical community spread across the world. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Each subscription helps us continue unearthing these fascinating stories that shaped our world. Now, let's get to the story. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. By spring 1945, German civilians were surviving on approximately 100 calories per day, less than half the recommended intake. Sugar had become a distant memory. Chocolate? A fairy tale parents told their children about the world before Hitler. Yet American GIs carried so much chocolate in their pockets that they often used it as currency, gambling stakes, or casually tossed it to children without a second thought. This abundance of something so scarce wasn't just food. It was a tangible symbol of American prosperity that undermined years of Nazi propaganda about the decadent, weak Americans. In the ruins of Berlin, a 10-year-old German boy named Klaus Schroeder would later recall in his memoirs the first time he saw an American soldier unwrap a Hershey bar. It was as if he pulled out a gold bar from his pocket, Schroeder wrote. Then he broke it into pieces and handed them out to all the children gathered around him. I had forgotten such sweetness existed in the world. My mother cried when I brought a piece home to share with her. The American military had not stumbled upon this powerful psychological tool by accident. The inclusion of chocolate in military rations dated back to World War I, but it was during World War II that the relationship between the U.S. military and American chocolate manufacturers reached its zenith. In 1937, the U.S. Army approached Hershey Company with a request: develop a chocolate ration that could withstand tropical heat, provide high energy, and taste just a little better than a boiled potato. The result was the Field Ration D, or, as soldiers called it, the Logan Bar, named after Captain Paul Logan, who worked with Hershey on its development. By 1945, American soldiers in Europe carried not just the Field Ration D, but also the more palatable Tropical Bar. Each American serviceman received 3 or 4 4-ounce chocolate bars weekly in their rations. Additionally, the American Red Cross distributed comfort kits containing Hershey bars to soldiers, and military PX, post exchanges, sold American candy at prices unimaginably low to Europeans. In total, between 1940 and 1945, Hershey produced over 3 billion ration bars for American troops. In the context of post-war Germany, this meant American occupation forces possessed an almost inexhaustible supply of what had become, to German children, an almost mythical treat. The strategic importance of this chocolate abundance was not lost on military leadership. General Lucius D. Clay, military governor of the American occupation zone in Germany, wrote in a declassified memo from August 1945, "The psychological impact of American food distribution, particularly items like chocolate and chewing gum to children, has done more to improve civil relations in 2 months than any official policy could have accomplished in a year." The German civilians' shock at America's chocolate bounty must be understood within the context of their wartime experience. The Nazi regime had promised prosperity, but delivered progressive deprivation. By 1943, most German civilians had adjusted to a diet of bread, potatoes, and rutabagas. Sugar rations had been cut repeatedly, reaching a low of 250 grams, about 8.8 ounces, per month by early 1945. Chocolate, containing both sugar and cocoa, neither of which Germany could produce domestically in significant quantities, had essentially disappeared from civilian life by 1942. Dr. Margareta Doss, a nutritionist who studied German dietary conditions immediately after the war, documented that many German children under the age of 6 had never tasted chocolate before encountering American soldiers. Her research, published in the Journal of European Nutritional Studies in 1947, noted the ability of American forces to distribute sweets casually to children created a cognitive dissonance in the German population. How could a nation so materially wealthy have defeated the supposedly superior German military machine? The abundance of luxury foods like chocolate directly contradicted years of propaganda about American weakness. While strategic planners may have recognized chocolate's diplomatic value, most individual American soldiers didn't think of their candy sharing as propaganda. For many GIs, giving chocolate to German children was simply a natural human response. Staff Sergeant Robert Williamson of the 1st Infantry Division recalled in an oral history recorded in 1989, "Those kids looked like skeletons, and they'd follow us around with these big eyes. What were we supposed to do? We had all this chocolate. Most of us had kids back home. You'd have to be some kind of monster not to share." The encounters created indelible memories for both Americans and Germans. Lieutenant James Harwood described in his letters home a scene in Frankfurt in May 1945. "Today, I gave a Hershey bar to a little blonde girl. Couldn't have been more than 5. She looked at it like I'd handed her the crown jewels. Then she ran to her mother, saying something in German over and over. The mother started crying and came over to thank me. I didn't understand a word, but I understood everything, if you know what I mean." From the German perspective, these chocolate encounters often represented their first positive interaction with Americans, whom Nazi propaganda had portrayed as brutal gangsters and uncultured barbarians. Ingrid Weber, who was 7 years old when American troops entered her village near Kassel, wrote in her 1995 autobiography, "The first American I ever met gave me a chocolate bar and patted my head. I was terrified at first. We had been told the Americans would kill us all. But he smiled and made funny faces until I laughed. I ran home and told my mother, 'They are not monsters.' That chocolate bar changed my entire world." Military historians have noted that the chocolate distribution had practical benefits beyond improving civil relations. In the chaotic early occupation period, when formal governance structures had collapsed, American soldiers found that chocolate could help maintain order among children who might otherwise have turned to mischief or crime out of hunger and boredom. Captain Howard Miller, serving with military government in Bavaria, noted in his official report from June 1945, "The informal distribution of candy and chewing gum has proven remarkably effective at keeping local children engaged with our personnel in a positive manner. This reduces incidents of theft and vandalism while fostering goodwill with their parents." The chocolate sharing wasn't always viewed positively by all parties, however. British occupation forces, operating under much stricter rationing at home, couldn't match American generosity, creating occasional tension between allies. Major Geoffrey Thompson of the British Army complained in a memo to his superiors in July 1945. "American personnel seem to have endless supplies of sweets which they distribute indiscriminately. This creates difficulties for British units in the same areas, as we cannot compete with this largesse. Local civilians are beginning to view us as the stingy occupiers." Some American officials also worried about creating dependency or undermining discipline. A directive issued to American personnel in Berlin in August 1945 cautioned, "While friendly relations with the civilian population are encouraged, personnel are reminded that excessive or indiscriminate distribution of rations and PX supplies can create unsustainable expectations and crowd control issues. Particularly when dealing with children, personnel should be mindful of creating gathering points that might interfere with military operations." Nevertheless, the chocolate diplomacy continued, becoming an iconic element of the American occupation. The power of these small gestures becomes clear in German memoirs and oral histories of the period. Dieter Lange, who grew up in Wiesbaden, recalled 70 years later, We had been taught that Americans were our mortal enemies, barely human. Then they came, and instead of killing us, they gave us chocolate. It forced us to question everything we had been told. If the Nazi leadership had lied about the Americans, what else had they lied about? Chocolate's symbolic power was particularly potent because children were often the primary recipients. As untainted by Nazi ideology and more open to new experiences than their parents, German children became cultural ambassadors within their own families. Hans Becker, who was 9 when American troops arrived in his hometown of Heidelberg, described this dynamic. After getting chocolate from the Americans, I told my father, "The Americans are good people." He became very angry and said they were still our enemies. But over the next few weeks, as I kept bringing home small gifts from the soldiers, not just chocolate, but sometimes chewing gum or even a small toy, I could see his attitude slowly changing. By late summer 1945, American authorities began formalizing what had started as spontaneous generosity. The Civil Affairs Division established structured programs for food distribution, which included chocolate and candy specifically allocated for children. A September 1945 directive encouraged controlled distribution of comfort items to German youth through established channels such as schools and church organizations, as part of the broader denazification and re-education campaign. These official programs acknowledged what frontline soldiers had already discovered. Food, especially luxury food like chocolate, could serve as a powerful tool of cultural diplomacy. Colonel James Crockett, who helped organize early humanitarian aid in Stuttgart, wrote in his report, "Food speaks a universal language. When a hungry child receives chocolate from an American soldier, it communicates more about American values than any formal speech or written proclamation ever could." The chocolate diplomacy extended beyond direct military distribution. As American families began joining servicemen in the occupation zones by late 1945, they brought their own supplies and habits. German children were often astounded to see American children casually eating or even discarding partially eaten chocolate bars, an unthinkable luxury. Erika Schmidt, who became friends with an American officer's daughter in Berlin, wrote, "Seeing Susan throw away half a chocolate bar because she wasn't in the mood for it anymore was more shocking to me than seeing bombed buildings. I rescued it from the trash when she wasn't looking and brought it home to share with my brother. We made it last for 3 days." The psychological impact of such encounters went beyond momentary pleasure. For many Germans, American chocolate became symbolic of a different possible future, one of abundance rather than scarcity, of peace rather than war. The contrast between their recent past and this glimpse of American plenty created a powerful incentive to align with Western values. As 1945 progressed into 1946, the systematic nature of American food aid increased. The occupation authorities recognized that preventing mass starvation was not just a humanitarian imperative, but a strategic necessity to maintain order and prevent the spread of communist influence. While basic staples formed the bulk of this aid, the inclusion of small amounts of luxury items like chocolate in school meals and holiday distributions gave German children a taste, literally, of American consumer culture. Herbert Hoover, who President Truman appointed to assess European food needs in 1946, specifically noted the importance of supplementary feeding programs for children that included occasional treats. In his report, he wrote, "The psychological effect of even small additions of special foods to the monotonous diet of European children cannot be overestimated. It gives them hope that normal life may someday return." German adults often had complex reactions to American chocolate generosity. While grateful for any assistance that benefited their children, many felt humiliation at their dependence on former enemies. Klaus Mann, returning to his native Germany from American exile in 1945, observed, "There is something deeply troubling about watching German children beg for sweets from American soldiers. Yet what alternative is there? The choice between pride and hunger is no choice at all when it comes to one's children." Some Germans worried about the cultural influence that came with American chocolate. Hedwig Stein, a teacher in Munich, wrote in her diary in October 1945, "The children now swarm around any American vehicle hoping for treats. They learn English phrases to charm the soldiers. 'Hello, Mr. Chocolate, please.' I wonder what values they are learning, along with their new taste for American sweets. Are we raising a generation that will trade anything for material comforts?" Such concerns reflected broader anxieties about American cultural influence that would continue throughout the Cold War. Yet for most German children, the memory of receiving chocolate from American soldiers remained uncomplicated, a moment of unexpected joy amid deprivation, and often their first positive interaction with the wider world beyond Germany's borders. By early 1946, the initial shock of American chocolate abundance had evolved into a more nuanced cultural exchange. German candy manufacturers, eager to restart production, began studying American products. Haribo, the German candy company founded in 1920, had produced limited confections during the war years using substitute ingredients. After observing the popularity of American chocolate, they worked to develop new products that could appeal to German children's newly awakened sweet tooth, despite ongoing sugar rationing. Otto Schlickmann, a confectioner who re-established his business in Cologne in 1946, recalled, "Before the war, German chocolate was different, darker, less sweet than American styles. But after seeing how children responded to Hershey bars, I knew consumer preferences had changed. Once we could get sugar again, we started making chocolate more similar to American varieties." This adaptation represented one small example of the broader cultural influence that would follow from the American presence in post-war Germany. From music to fashion to food, American styles would increasingly shape German consumer culture in the coming decades, a process that began with those first chocolate encounters in 1945. For American soldiers, giving chocolate to German children served multiple psychological purposes. Beyond simple generosity, it helped many GIs reconcile the complex emotions of occupying a defeated enemy nation. After years of seeing Germans only as enemies, these human interactions helped soldiers navigate their new role. Sergeant William Brandt wrote home to his wife in Pennsylvania in June 1945. "It's strange, Dorothy. Last month I was shooting at Germans, and now I'm giving their kids candy. Some of these children look just like ours back home. When I give them chocolate and see them smile, it helps me remember what we were fighting for in the first place. Not to hurt these kids, but to give them a chance at a better future than Hitler had planned for them." For German children who experienced the chocolate diplomacy firsthand, the impact often lasted a lifetime. Decades later, many still recalled the taste of their first American chocolate with remarkable clarity. Ursula Kellner, interviewed in 2005 for an oral history project, could still describe her first Hershey bar. "It was in July 1945. I was 6 years old. An American soldier with red hair gave me a brown bar wrapped in silver paper. It tasted sweeter than anything I had ever known, almost too sweet, but wonderful. For years afterward, I associated the smell of chocolate with safety." The chocolate distribution also created space for more substantive cultural exchange. Once children began regularly interacting with American soldiers for treats, other forms of communication often followed. Soldiers taught children English words and simple games. Children helped soldiers learn basic German phrases. These interactions helped humanize both sides to each other. Captain Richard Hartmann, stationed in Berlin from 1945-1947, described in his memoir how these exchanges evolved. "It started with chocolate, but soon the same kids were bringing us photographs of their families, asking questions about America, showing us their school books. One boy, Manfred, who couldn't have been more than 12, appointed himself my unofficial German teacher. He'd correct my pronunciation in exchange for chocolate." By the time I left Germany, we were having real conversations about everything from baseball to his plans for the future. Not all chocolate-centered interactions were positive. As word spread about American generosity, soldiers sometimes found themselves overwhelmed by crowds of children. In some areas, distribution had to be formalized to prevent chaos. Additionally, there were troubling incidents where some soldiers exploited the desperation of hungry children, requiring sexual or criminal behavior in exchange for treats. Military authorities took such abuses seriously, and several soldiers were court-martialed for exploitation of German civilians, including children. Colonel Robert Maxwell, who oversaw occupation forces in a district of Frankfurt, issued a stern order in July 1945. Any personnel found using food or PX items to solicit inappropriate behavior from German civilians, especially minors, will face immediate disciplinary action. Such conduct undermines our mission and violates the fundamental values we fought to defend. These problematic incidents remained the exception, however. The overwhelming majority of chocolate distributions represented genuine goodwill. Many American soldiers, missing their own families, found comfort in bringing joy to German children. As Private Joseph Kinney wrote to his mother, "The kids here remind me of my little brothers. Their clothes are ragged and they're too skinny, but they're still just kids. Yesterday I gave out all my chocolate ration to them. Wish you could have seen their faces. Made me feel like Santa Claus." As 1945 drew to a close, the initial phase of occupation was transitioning to more structured reconstruction efforts. The impromptu chocolate diplomacy of those first months evolved accordingly. American officials, recognizing the positive impact of these interactions, incorporated elements of them into formal aid programs. The school lunch program, established in the American occupation zone in late 1945, provided a daily meal to German school children, often their most nutritious food of the day. While these meals focused on meeting basic nutritional needs, they occasionally included small chocolate treats on special occasions, maintaining the association between American presence and improved conditions. Carl Brigham, who helped administer the program in Hesse, noted in his December 1945 report the inclusion of a small chocolate portion in the Christmas week lunches created noticeable excitement among students. Teachers report increased attendance and improved behavior in anticipation of these special meals. The psychological benefit appears to outweigh the modest additional cost. The chocolate diplomacy of 1945 represented more than just food distribution. It became a powerful symbol of the different approaches to occupation taken by the Western Allies versus the Soviet Union. In the Soviet occupation zone, such informal interactions between soldiers and German civilians were generally discouraged. The stark difference in available consumer goods between the zones became one of the earliest visible manifestations of the emerging Cold War. Gerhard Weber, whose family fled from Thuringia in the Soviet zone to Hesse in the American zone in late 1945, recalled the difference. In the Russian zone, soldiers sometimes gave children bread or soup if they were kind, but they had no luxuries to share. The first week after we arrived in the American zone, my brother and I received chocolate, chewing gum, and even a small toy car from American soldiers. My father said, "Now you see why we left." As Germany moved into 1946, the immediate post-war chaos began to stabilize. The chocolate shock that had so defined early interactions between Americans and Germans evolved into more routine relations. Yet those initial encounters left an indelible mark on German perceptions of Americans and laid groundwork for what would become a strong transatlantic relationship. The chocolate memories remained particularly vivid for the generation of Germans born between 1935 and 1945. Children who had experienced both Nazi rule and American occupation during their formative years. This cohort would come of age during Germany's economic miracle of the 1950s, often embracing American consumer culture and political values with enthusiasm that puzzled their parents. Kurt Fischer, who became a prominent business leader in West Germany's chocolate industry in the 1960s, explicitly traced his career choice to those early encounters. "I was 8 years old when the Americans arrived in our village. The soldier who gave me my first chocolate bar changed the course of my life. I decided then that I wanted to be part of creating something that brought such joy. When people ask why Germans so quickly adopted American products after the war, they forget that for children like me, American abundance represented hope when we had none. As occupation forces settled into their role in 1946, American military authorities began to recognize and formalize what individual soldiers had discovered through their chocolate sharing. Soft power could be as effective as military might in reshaping German society. The Marshall Plan, formally proposed in 1947 but whose principles were already guiding American policy in 1946, would institutionalize this approach, combining material aid with cultural influence to bind Western Europe, including West Germany, to the American sphere. The chocolate diplomacy of 1945-46 prefigured this larger strategy in microcosm. Lieutenant Colonel James Peterson, who served as a civil affairs officer in Bavaria, observed in a February 1946 report, "The ability of individual American soldiers to create goodwill through small gestures like chocolate distribution demonstrates that economic abundance, freely shared, constitutes a powerful ideological weapon." The contrast between our ability to provide such luxuries and the material conditions under Soviet occupation speaks volumes to the German population about which system offers a better future. For the chocolate industry itself, the military connection proved transformative. Hershey, which had devoted more than 90% of its production to military contracts during the war, successfully transitioned back to civilian markets partly because its products had gained international recognition through military distribution. Millions of people worldwide, including Germans, had their first taste of American chocolate through interaction with U.S. servicemen. Milton Hershey himself, though elderly by the war's end, reportedly took particular satisfaction in reports about German children receiving his company's products. According to company historian Joseph Snavely, when shown photographs of American soldiers distributing Hershey bars to German children in 1945, the chocolate magnate remarked, "That's a better use for our chocolate than any I could have imagined when we started making those military ration bars." By mid-1946, as Germany's own confectionery industry slowly rebuilt, American chocolate remained both a physical reality and a powerful memory for German children. The impact extended beyond momentary pleasure. It shaped expectations about what normal life could and should include. Hildegard Knef, later a famous German actress, but in 1945 a teenage survivor of the Battle of Berlin, wrote in her memoir, "American chocolate taught us to want things again. After years of learning to live without, to suppress desire, suddenly we were permitted to want, and that wanting itself regardless of what was wanted felt like freedom." This awakening of consumer desire would become central to West Germany's post-war identity. As the country rebuilt, its emerging market economy emphasized consumer choice and material comfort as alternatives to both Nazi militarism and Soviet communism. The chocolate bars that amazed children in 1945 foreshadowed the economic miracle that would transform West Germany in the 1950s. For American occupation authorities, the positive reception of chocolate distribution offered valuable insights into effectively managing the occupation. Major General Lucius Clay, deputy military governor in 1945 and later military governor of the American occupation zone, incorporated these lessons into broader policy. In a September 1946 directive, he emphasized, "Our success in Germany depends not merely on enforcing surrender terms, but on convincing the German people that their future prosperity and freedom lie in association with Western democracies." Small acts of generosity by individual Americans have proven remarkably effective in this regard. Clay, who would become a key architect of Germany's post-war reconstruction, understood that rebuilding would require German cooperation and eventually partnership. The chocolate encounters helped establish the interpersonal foundation for this transition from enemies to allies. As Clay wrote to the War Department in October 1946, the German population, particularly in the American zone, has shown increasing receptivity to democratic reorientation. This receptivity stems not just from formal education programs, but from daily interactions with American personnel that demonstrate the material and social benefits of our system. For ordinary Germans, American chocolate distribution often provoked complex emotions, gratitude mixed with humiliation, pleasure with resentment. Elizabeth Heinemann, a mother of 3 in Heidelberg, recorded in her diary in August 1945, "The children come home daily with sweets from the Americans. I am grateful they are fed, but it pains me that I cannot provide for them myself." Today, Michael asked why German mothers couldn't give chocolate to their children like American mothers. I had no answer that wouldn't sound like blame or self-pity. Such feelings were common among German adults, many of whom struggled with their nation's defeat and their personal responsibility. While children might simply enjoy unexpected treats, parents and grandparents processed these interactions through their awareness of recent history. Walter Kempowski, who later became a prominent German writer, remembered his mother's reaction when he brought home chocolate in 1945. She began to cry, saying, "They destroy our country and then give our children sweets." But she still let me eat the chocolate. This ambivalence never fully disappeared, but it gradually transformed as the occupation evolved into partnership. By 1948, with the Berlin airlift demonstrating American commitment to German well-being in the face of Soviet pressure, even many formerly skeptical Germans began to view American presence more positively. Chocolate, once a symbol of German humiliation and American dominance, gradually became instead a shared pleasure and eventually a normal consumer product. The children who experienced the chocolate diplomacy firsthand carried its memory into adulthood. Many became what Germans called the miracle generation, the cohort that rebuilt the country in the 1950s and 1960s with a distinctly Western, consumption-oriented outlook. Social historian Maria Höhn noted in her research, "Those who were children during the occupation often developed a powerful identification with American consumer culture that shaped their adult preferences and politics." Their first positive experience with this culture frequently involved chocolate. Particularly for children from more privileged pre-war backgrounds, American chocolate represented not just a new taste, but a status reversal. Monika von Schluter, whose father had been a Nazi Party official, described this dynamic. "Before 1945, we had more than most: nice clothes, a car, plenty of food. After the surrender, suddenly we had nothing." Standing in a cluster of ragged children receiving chocolate from American soldiers, people my father had called our inferiors, was a profound lesson in how quickly fortunes can change. For children from less advantaged backgrounds, American chocolate distribution sometimes provided their first experience of receiving something solely because they were children, not based on their parents' status or political connections. Maria Kraus, who grew up in a working-class family in Frankfurt, recalled, "Under the Nazis, special treats always went first to children of party members. The Americans gave chocolate to any child who came up to them. It was my first experience of something being distributed fairly." Religious organizations, particularly Catholic and Protestant relief agencies, collaborated with American occupation authorities to formalize and expand food aid to German children. By Christmas 1945, these programs were providing supplemental nutrition to millions of German children with special holiday distributions, often including American-supplied chocolate. Father Heinrich Böll, a Catholic priest in Cologne and cousin to the writer who would later win the Nobel Prize for Literature, described the 1945 Christmas distribution in his parish. "We received cartons of food items from American charities, powdered milk, canned meat, and bars of chocolate. For many children, this was the first Christmas gift they had received in years." One mother told me her son slept with his chocolate bar under his pillow for 3 nights before finally eating it, afraid it might disappear if he didn't keep it close. The chocolate diplomacy had particular significance in Berlin, where the division of the city into 4 occupation zones created a laboratory for comparing different approaches. Children in the American sector who received chocolate often shared it with friends in the Soviet sector, creating an informal network of cultural exchange that foreshadowed the city's later role as a Cold War showcase. Erich Honecker, who would later become leader of East Germany but in 1945 was a young communist functionary in Berlin, reportedly complained to Soviet authorities about the chocolate propaganda of American forces. According to Soviet archives declassified in the 1990s, Honecker urged greater control over interaction between German children and Western occupation personnel, arguing that material enticements were undermining ideological re-education efforts in the Soviet sector. American chocolate even found its way into formal diplomacy. At a contentious meeting of the Allied Control Council in November 1945, American General Mark Clark reportedly broke tension by offering chocolate bars to his Soviet, British, and French counterparts. His aide noted in a memorandum, "The Soviet delegation initially hesitated but eventually accepted." General Sokolovsky actually smiled while eating his Hershey bar, the first time I've seen him do so in any meeting. Such moments highlighted how chocolate functioned not just as food, but as a cultural signifier, representing American abundance, technological capability, shelf-stable chocolate being a manufacturing achievement, and social values of sharing and informality. Even at the highest diplomatic levels, chocolate carried symbolic weight. For the German public, American chocolate distribution created a vivid contrast with their experience under the Third Reich. Despite Nazi propaganda promising prosperity, wartime Germany had experienced progressively severe rationing. By 1943, most civilian Germans were limited to 250 grams of sugar and 200 grams of jam or artificial honey per month. Chocolate had been classified as a non-essential luxury item and removed from civilian distribution entirely except for special military rations or rewards for exceptional service to the regime. Dr. Anneliese Hochmuth, who studied German nutritional conditions in the immediate post-war period, noted in her research, the severe restriction of sweet foods under Nazi rationing created a population psychologically primed to associate sugar with luxury, comfort, and normalcy. American distribution of chocolate tapped directly into this psychological state, creating an immediate positive association that more basic food aid might not have achieved. This context helps explain why chocolate distribution, beyond its caloric value, carried such powerful psychological impact. For German children and adults alike, chocolate symbolized not just food, but a return to normality, or even a new, better normal than they had known before. The strategic impact of the chocolate diplomacy eventually extended beyond German borders. As Cold War tensions solidified in 1947 to 48, American planners incorporated lessons from the German experience into broader containment policy. The United States Information Agency, established in 1953 but building on earlier initiatives, explicitly included demonstration of American abundance as a propaganda objective in countries vulnerable to Soviet influence. A classified 1948 State Department memorandum on psychological operations noted, "The voluntary sharing of consumer goods, particularly those appealing to children, has proven extremely effective in Germany and should be incorporated into our approach in other regions. Unlike formal aid programs, such person-to-person sharing creates emotional connections resistant to counter-propaganda." This insight would shape American public diplomacy throughout the Cold War. From the Berlin Airlift's candy drops to cultural exchanges that highlighted American consumer abundance, the chocolate diplomacy of 1945 provided a template for winning hearts and minds through material culture. For the German children who experienced it, the memory remained vivid decades later. Werner Herzog, who would become one of Germany's most celebrated film directors, was just 3 years old when American troops arrived in his Bavarian village. In a 2005 interview, he recalled, "An American soldier gave me my first chocolate. I remember the taste, the smell, the crinkle of the wrapper. It made an impression that has lasted a lifetime. This incredible sweetness coming from someone who was supposed to be our enemy. Such formative experiences helped shape a generation of Germans who would embrace transatlantic partnership not just as political necessity, but as cultural preference. When American products became widely available in West German markets in the 1950s, they found consumers already predisposed to view them positively based on these early encounters. The chocolate diplomacy also influenced how Germans processed their recent Nazi past. For children especially, the kindness of American soldiers created a cognitive framework that helped them separate their emerging German identity from the Nazi regime that had collapsed. Psychologist Kurt Lewin, who studied German re-education after escaping Nazi persecution himself, observed, "The positive experiences German children had with American occupation personnel provided crucial psychological counterweight to Nazi indoctrination. These experiences offered alternative models of authority and national behavior precisely when German children were reformulating their understanding of the world." The chocolate sharing had particular significance for Jewish survivors who remained in or returned to Germany after the war. Ruth Kluger, a Holocaust survivor who later became a prominent literary scholar, described in her memoir the disorienting experience of seeing American soldiers give chocolate to the same German children who had taunted her before deportation. "It was hard to watch," she wrote, "but also strangely hopeful. If these children could learn to see Americans as friends rather than enemies, perhaps Germany could truly change." For American soldiers, particularly those who remained as occupation forces after the initial victory, chocolate sharing provided a way to humanize their mission. Many found themselves in an ambiguous position, tasked with controlling a defeated population while also helping rebuild the country. Small acts of generosity helped soldiers navigate this contradiction. Lieutenant Robert Anderson, who served in Munich from 1945-1947, wrote in his memoir, "When I arrived, I still thought of all Germans as Nazis, but it's impossible to maintain that view when faced with hungry children. The first time I gave out chocolate bars from my ration, something changed in my perspective. These weren't little Nazis. They were just kids who had the misfortune to be born in the wrong place at the wrong time." Military historians have noted that such interactions benefited American forces as much as German recipients. Dr. Stephen Ambrose, in his study of the American military occupation, concluded, "The ability to provide luxury items like chocolate gave American soldiers a positive role beyond that of conquerors. This humanitarian dimension improved morale among occupation forces and reduced incidents of violence against the civilian population. Soldiers who saw themselves as helpers rather than just occupiers behaved accordingly." By 1947, as the Marshall Plan took shape and Germany's path toward division into East and West became clearer, the informal chocolate diplomacy of the early occupation had evolved into more structured programs. Yet the memory of those initial encounters remained powerful for both Germans and Americans who experienced them. One unforeseen consequence emerged in German confectionery production itself. As restrictions on German manufacturing gradually lifted and sugar became more available, German chocolate makers began producing varieties that more closely resembled American styles, sweeter and milkier than traditional German chocolate had been. This adaptation represented one small example of the broader Americanization of German consumer culture that would characterize the post-war decades. Hans Imhoff, who rebuilt the Stolwerk Chocolate Company in Cologne after the war, explained this shift in a 1985 interview. Before 1945, German chocolate was distinct from American varieties, generally darker and less sweet. After the occupation, German children had developed a taste for American-style milk chocolate. When we resumed civilian production, we had to adapt to these new preferences or lose our market to imported products. This culinary influence mirrored broader cultural and political reorientations. West Germany, emerging from occupation to become a sovereign state in 1949, would build its new identity largely in alignment with American values and interests. The Federal Republic embraced democracy, market economics, and transatlantic partnership. Choices supported not just by political calculation, but by ordinary Germans' everyday experiences with Americans, including those formative chocolate encounters. The chocolate diplomacy of 1945-46 represented an early example of what political scientists would later call soft power, the ability to influence others through attraction rather than coercion. Joseph Nye, who coined this term in the 1990s, might have pointed to the Hershey bars in occupied Germany as a perfect case study. The chocolate distribution succeeded precisely because it wasn't conceived primarily as propaganda, but rather emerged organically from genuine human interaction. Wolfgang Schmidt, who became a prominent advertising executive in Frankfurt during the 1960s, traced his career inspiration directly to those early American chocolate encounters. As a 10-year-old in 1945, I was amazed not just by the chocolate itself, but by the cheerful, colorful wrappers, so different from the severe utility packaging we had become used to. It was my first lesson in how products could carry emotional messages beyond their practical function. American soldiers weren't just giving us food, they were giving us a glimpse of a different way of life. This cultural dimension became increasingly important as Germany moved from immediate post-war recovery toward long-term reconstruction. While the initial chocolate sharing addressed physical hunger, it simultaneously planted seeds of cultural hunger for the American lifestyle those chocolate bars represented. By 1948-49, as basic food security improved in Western occupation zones, this aspirational dimension took precedence. General Lucius Clay recognized this evolution in his final report as military governor before the establishment of the Federal Republic. Our most successful initiatives have combined material assistance with cultural attraction. The German population, particularly youth, increasingly associates American presence not with defeat and occupation, but with prosperity and opportunity. This transformation represents our most significant achievement and the strongest foundation for continued partnership. The impact was most visible in urban areas with significant American military presence. Cities like Frankfurt, Munich, and Kaiserslautern developed vibrant subcultures around American PX, post-exchanges, where Germans employed by occupation forces could sometimes purchase American goods, including chocolate, to bring home to their families. Maria Krause, who worked as a translator for the American military government in Frankfurt, described the status these items conveyed. If you could bring home American chocolate or coffee, it showed you had connections to the Americans. This became a form of social capital in post-war Germany, proof that you were aligned with the new power rather than the discredited past. Such dynamics created occasional tensions. Some German traditionalists worried about American cultural influence, particularly on youth. Dr. Wilhelm Hoffmann, a gymnasium high school principal in Stuttgart, complained in a 1948 newspaper editorial, "Our children now measure everything against American standards. They want American sweets, American music, American clothing. What will become of German culture if this continues? We defeat Hitler only to surrender to Mickey Mouse and Hershey bars." Such concerns reflected deeper anxieties about German cultural identity after Nazism's collapse. With traditional German nationalism discredited by its association with Hitler, what would define German identity moving forward? The emerging answer in West Germany would be a hybrid culture, maintaining certain German traditions while embracing democratic politics and consumer capitalism with distinctly American influences. The chocolate diplomacy had particular significance for German Jews who survived the Holocaust or returned from exile after 1945. For this community, American presence represented protection and justice after years of persecution. Simon Wiesenthal, the famous Nazi hunter who survived multiple concentration camps, recalled in his memoirs watching American soldiers distribute chocolate to children in Austria in May 1945, just days after his liberation. "I watched with complex emotions. These same children had perhaps cheered as we were taken away. Yet seeing them receive kindness rather than vengeance from their conquerors gave me hope that perhaps the cycle of hatred could be broken. By 1948, as tensions between Western allies and the Soviet Union intensified, the chocolate diplomacy took on new significance in the emerging Cold War. The Berlin blockade, which began in June 1948 when Soviet forces cut ground access to the Western-controlled sectors of Berlin, created a dramatic showcase for American abundance versus Soviet restriction. The resulting Berlin airlift, which delivered food, fuel, and supplies to the blockaded sectors for nearly a year, included special provisions for children. American and British pilots famously made small parachutes to drop candy and chocolate to Berlin children, watching the planes approach Tempelhof Airport, an operation that became known as the Candy Bombers or Raisin Bombers, Rosenenbomber. Lieutenant Gale Halverson, who initiated this practice, described his motivation. "I met some children at the airport fence who asked no questions about chocolate or gum, which was unusual. They were so grateful for flour to be free that I was moved. I told them I'd drop some chocolate the next day and wiggle my wings so they'd know which plane was mine." Halverson's unauthorized initiative, which began with him using his own ration, was soon adopted as official policy once commanders recognized its propaganda value. For Berlin children, these candy drops became the most memorable aspect of the airlift. Decades later, many Berliners in their 60s and 70s could still describe exactly where they stood to catch the falling treats. Crystal Jonge, who was 8 during the blockade, recalled in a 2008 interview, "We would wait for hours near the approach path. When we saw a pilot wiggle his wings, we knew candy was coming. Everyone would scramble when the little parachutes appeared. I caught a Hershey bar once, the proudest moment of my childhood." The candy drops, though involving relatively small amounts of chocolate compared to the airlift's main cargo, generated international media attention that amplified their propaganda value. Life magazine's photos spread showing Berlin children waving at American planes and chasing candy parachutes presented a perfect visual metaphor for American benevolence versus Soviet hostility. This symbolism wasn't lost on Soviet authorities, who condemned the candy drops as cheap propaganda tricks while struggling to explain to their own sector's children why they received no such treats. A Soviet information officer in Berlin complained in a declassified report to Moscow, "The Americans are resorting to the basest forms of manipulation, literally bribing children with sweets to create anti-Soviet sentiment. Yet we must acknowledge the effectiveness of these tactics with the psychologically vulnerable juvenile population." As the Federal Republic of Germany established itself as a sovereign state in 1949, the chocolate diplomacy entered a new phase. American troops remained, but now as NATO allies rather than occupation forces. Their continued presence, including their abundant PX and commissaries stocked with chocolate and other consumer goods, served as visible reminders of the material benefits of Western alignment. German manufacturers, finally free of occupation restrictions and benefiting from Marshall Plan investment, worked to compete with American imports by developing their own confectionery innovations. Companies like Haribo, Balsen, and Stolberg adapted American production techniques and marketing approaches while maintaining distinctive German identity. Richard Rudolph, who worked as a marketing director for Stolberg in the 1950s, explained this hybrid approach. "We learned from American candy manufacturers about mass production, bright packaging, and advertising to children. But we maintained certain German chocolate traditions, our devotion to quality ingredients and craftsmanship. The result was neither purely German nor American, but something new." This commercial evolution paralleled political developments. West Germany, under Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, embraced what became known as Westbindung, Western alignment, tying the new republic firmly to NATO and the European Coal and Steel Community, precursor to the European Union, while maintaining distinctive German institutions and traditions. Adenauer himself understood the psychological importance of consumer normalization. When addressing concerns about American cultural influence, he reportedly commented, "A nation that can enjoy chocolate again is less likely to embrace extremism. Let them have their sweets. It is a small price for stability." By the mid-1950s, as West Germany experienced its economic miracle, Wirtschaftswunder, American chocolate no longer seemed miraculous. German supermarkets stocked both domestic and imported varieties, and German children no longer needed to approach American soldiers for treats. The chocolate shock of 1945 had given way to chocolate normalcy, itself a symbol of how thoroughly West Germany had recovered and transformed. The memory remained powerful, however, particularly for the generation that experienced the transition from Third Reich to American occupation. German author Heinrich Böll, who would later win the Nobel Prize for Literature, captured this generational experience in his 1957 short story, Christmas Not Just Once a Year, which features a traumatized German family whose daughter receives American chocolate in 1945. The chocolate becomes a symbol of both humiliation and hope, the family's defeat intertwined with the possibility of a better future. East Germany followed a dramatically different path. Under Soviet occupation, and then as the German Democratic Republic, East Germans experienced neither the initial chocolate shock nor the subsequent consumer abundance of the West. American products, including chocolate, became potent symbols of Western prosperity that the communist system struggled to match. Stasi records declassified after German reunification reveal how seriously East German authorities took this chocolate gap. A 1961 internal report warned Western chocolate and confectionery products smuggled across the border before closure represented a significant ideological threat. These products created material desires our economy cannot currently satisfy, leading to discontent, particularly among youth. The Berlin Wall, constructed in 1961, physically separated Germans not just from each other, but from different economic systems and consumer cultures. West Berlin's shops, visible to East Berliners before the wall, had prominently displayed American and West German chocolate products. After separation, these became forbidden fruits that East Germans could only acquire through special shops requiring Western currency or as gifts from relatives in the West. Dieter Hoffmann, who grew up in East Berlin in the 1960s, described receiving Western chocolate in holiday packages from his aunt in Hamburg. The chocolate came wrapped in bright paper with elaborate designs we never saw in our shops. Before eating it, I would save the wrappers, smoothing them out to keep as treasures. They were like colorful messages from another world. East German authorities attempted to develop their own distinctive confectionery culture, with factories producing chocolates and candies under state direction. However, shortages of cocoa beans and other imports frequently limited production quality and quantity. Brands like Knusperflocken, Crispy Flakes, achieved some popularity but could never compete with the mystique of Western products glimpsed in smuggled magazines or Western television broadcasts that reached parts of East Germany. By the 1970s and 1980s, as East-West German relations warmed slightly under Ostpolitik, more East Germans received gift packages, Westpaket, from Western relatives that typically included chocolate and coffee among luxury items unavailable or prohibitively expensive in the East. These packages maintained the association between American-style consumer abundance and West German prosperity. When the Berlin Wall fell in November 1989, one of the most iconic images showed East Berliners receiving welcome gifts of flowers and chocolate from West Berliners as they crossed the border for the first time. In a sense, history had come full circle, chocolate once again serving as an edible symbol of a new future and reconciliation. During German reunification, Western chocolate companies quickly moved into the former East, establishing distribution networks and marketing campaigns, targeting consumers eager to access previously forbidden Western products. Mars, Nestlé, and Kraft, which had acquired German chocolate brands, competed for market share in the new Eastern territories. For older East Germans who remembered the immediate post-war period, this created a strange echo of 1945, American chocolate, again symbolizing a defeated system and a new beginning. As Ernst Müller, who experienced both transitions, observed in 1990, first the Americans defeated Hitler and brought chocolate. Now their economic system has defeated communism, and here comes the chocolate again. History has a sweet tooth, it seems. The cultural significance of the chocolate diplomacy continues to resonate in united Germany. The candy bomber story in particular has become a treasured historical anecdote taught in German schools as an example of humanity transcending conflict. When Gail Halvorsen, the original candy bomber pilot, visited Berlin on the 50th anniversary of the airlift in 1998, he was treated as a national hero by Germans too young to have experienced the events themselves. In museums throughout Germany, American chocolate wrappers from the occupation period are displayed as historical artifacts, small but significant pieces of material culture that helped reshape German-American relations. The Allied Museum in Berlin features a special exhibit on the candy bombers, including original parachutes and chocolate bars preserved from 1948-49. The chocolate diplomacy of 1945-48 offers valuable lessons about post-conflict reconciliation. Unlike formal denazification programs, which often created resentment, the person-to-person chocolate sharing built genuine human connections across enemy lines. It demonstrated that after ideological defeat, offering people a taste of a better alternative could be more effective than punishment alone. Modern humanitarian organizations have studied this history for insights into effective aid distribution. The combination of meeting basic needs while including small luxury items that preserve dignity and bring joy has informed contemporary approaches to refugee assistance and disaster relief. As the International Rescue Committee noted in a 2010 policy paper, the post-Witry experience in Germany suggests that including modest comfort items alongside essential supplies can significantly improve psychological outcomes and community relations in aid situations. For the German children of 1945, now in their 80s and 90s, American chocolate remains a powerful memory, a small, sweet moment amid destruction and uncertainty that often shaped their view of the United States for a lifetime. As occupation child, Klaus Weber reflected at a 70th anniversary commemoration of VE Day, "That chocolate bar told me more about America than any official speech could have. It said, 'We were enemies yesterday, but you are still a child who deserves something sweet.'" In that simple act was the beginning of reconciliation.